Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
The doomsday narrative of British Prime Minister David Cameron, the Bank of England, and their official friends around the world is setting a course for a self-fulfilling financial panic. So, the argument made by this article is that the Prime Minister of England and the Bank of England, that's what it's called. The Bank of England are throwing around these doomsday terms and arguments saying that England's economy will collapse if people go through with Brexit. For those of you who are not aware, Brexit is a referendum that people will vote in to leave the EU. So if that happens, Britain will no longer be part of the EU. It won't see the EU's trading advantages. At the same time, it won't be subject to, it will be completely sovereign, and it won't be subject to immigration policies that the EU has, which is the basic reason why the referendum was proposed to begin with. So it's not actually, the referendum, the basis for it isn't really economic so much as it is cultural. People don't want as many immigrants coming into the country at such a high rate, because they're worried about cultural shifts within the country, which I believe is understandable. The people who are against the referendum use an economic argument. Basically, if Britain leaves the EU, then it's going to lose it's going to lose a lot of its economic power because of the close economic ties that all the EU member states have together. So, upon leaving the EU, Britain would trade less with Europe and more with other nations. It's possible that overall trade may fall during the transition. It's interesting because I just read an article on the New York Times talking about how all the economists agree that if the Britain was to leave the EU, there would be a massive economic fall. At the same time, this article says, but all economists agree that the cost of such a decline would be small and short-lived. A just-released study from the IMF shows that the share of British goods exported to the EU fell stunningly to 45% in 2014 and 60% in 2000. This shift away from slower-growing Europe to the rest of the world is set to continue irrespective of Brexit. So, on the New York Times article, all the economists agree that it's a huge mistake. This article, all the economists agree that it would be a short-term fall. I don't even know what to make of that. The different sides on this issue are so split that it's impossible to tell who's actually telling the truth. It seems like a bunch of ideological exaggeration to make a point. At the same time, should this study be believed, Britain's trade with Europe is already declining to begin with and is moving towards other parts of the world that are growing more quickly. If that is the case, then Brexit would have a short-term economic effect on Britain as Britain and it would move Britain to channel its economic resources to other areas even more quickly. I don't know. Do you have, as somebody who's not really aware of the situation, do you have any opinion on this?
I'm kind of confused.
Okay, so basically what Brexit is this. So do you know what a referendum is? It's where the people vote to do something. Okay, directly. So Brexit is a referendum where they're going to leave the EU. The EU is all of Europe. Each country gives a little bit of its sovereignty up to a European government, and that government can make policies. It's kind of not really similar to the way the states work.
Wait, so they're voting to leave the EU?
Yeah, voting to leave the EU. Now that means that they're not going to have access to the economic benefits that the EU gives them. So free trade and open borders. Okay? So which would supposedly cause their economy to fall. The reason why they're doing it is that they don't want there's a lot of immigrants coming in, and because England is an EU member state, it doesn't have as much control of its borders, okay? Yeah. So you have lots of immigrants coming in from third world countries that are often Islamic or that have a very different set of ideals than British countries. A lot of the time they don't really absorb into the country's framework very well, and so a lot of the more conservative parties of Britain want to split away from the EU so that they can control their own borders more effectively. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's basically what Brexit is. That being said, do you have any sort of an opinion on it?
I think so. So they want to vote to leave the EU so that not as many immigrants are going to be coming into their country like freely.
Yeah, basically. Because you also have to understand these immigrants, a lot of the time they don't work, they use up a massive amount of social resources, they don't speak the language. So they don't actually benefit the economy that much. There are studies out there that show that every immigrant costs Europe a significant amount of money. The only argument really to be made for the immigration is a diversity and also an economic one, being that Europeans don't have as many kids. So for the economic stability of the country, you need immigration.
So they're not like, are they harming anything? Like, are they harming the economy or anything?
Well, first of all, they cost money. They move to poor areas. They basically, not all of them. This is not true for all of them, but a lot of England was moving away from ghettos and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But with this growth of immigration, their ghettos, basically kind of like comparable to American ghettos, have formed where you have these immigrants who keep a lot of their cultural heritage and don't really assimilate into the country very well. And people don't like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can understand why they'd want to do that, but I don't know if, like, cause yeah, I don't know if I'd be like for or against it. I mean, I can understand why they are like not liking this, but at the same time, it could like really screw them over if they decide to do this, and then if they decide
you're
to
being very vague. So
like if they decide to
economically
get cut off from from Europe.
So you would take the economic safety net of Europe over the cultural unity and control that the more conservative parties want. It's incredibly important to realize that you can't just cut the cultural and economic aspects of this apart from each other, because a strong culture that's united in a common cause is definitely going to have a stronger economic. It's gonna flow together. It's going to have more cohesion, and it will definitely have an impact on the economy. You cannot say, if the conservatives are to be believed, and this immigration will be very disruptive to Britain, it will definitely have a negative effect on the British economy. You cannot cut those two issues apart from each other, and so I think that's something everybody should take into consideration.